Roll 3, slate 4.
It's roll 2.
2, is it? Okay, all right. Okay. What was the war like when you got there in 1972, Norm?
Well, I was rather depressed by what I saw. I went to Saigon. I knew it was a brief visit, and I thought I'd be doing a bit of work for Saigon or surrounding areas and going to Vung Tau. But the first thing I was told when I got to Saigon that it wasn't possible to go to Vung Tau where the Australians were, A, because of the area between Saigon and Vung Tau, a matter of about 100 odd miles, was not secure, and B, that the Australian Army didn't have any transport to get me down there, helicopters or the like. So that quite surprised me, but I think the most outstanding thing was that the morale of the South Vietnamese, although I must admit I didn't speak the language, you get a feel of something when you've been in the news business for a long time, as I have, and I just felt that the inevitable was that Saigon would fall to the communists.
And the American soldiers?
The American soldiers themselves also seem to be suffering from this lack of morale. I don't know whether it was the leadership or whether it was the problems at home where there was great opposition to the war developing, etc. But in many cases the morale of the GI seemed to be very low, and this meant that he, as a fighting force, he ceased to be effective.
A hospital?
I visited a hospital not far out of Saigon. I wasn't allowed to film in there. I expected to see American wounded, but by far the majority of the American GIs in that hospital were there for treatment for overdoses of drugs.
Mm. The Australians, you couldn't go down and visit them. Were they in a dangerous position at all?
Well, not at that time, but the potential danger existed all the time because, as you're aware, this was a war without frontiers, without defined borders and where it would strike. I was concerned that I couldn't get down to Vung Tau, and I applied that to the Australian digger in the reverse, that the Australian digger wouldn't be able to get back to the safety of Saigon.
Roll 3, slate 5. Start. Were you disappointed that you weren't able to go out into a war zone?
In a way, yes. Obviously, a reporter in the field likes to get the best material that might be available, but I also recognised the fact that there was a fair bit of war footage around, and it has been going on for 5 or 6 years, and there probably wasn't much more to report. So I took it from another angle. I did a couple of stories in Saigon on refugees, and particularly the orphanages, which were absolutely depressing. The byproducts of war, to me, were quite interesting.
How do you think journalists turn off to those aspects of it after being there for a while, or why do they?
Turn off from war?
Or to the human suffering that war entails?
Well, I think it's as descriptive as anything about war. When you show the byproducts of war, it has a greater impact than a soldier who is being paid to kill or be killed, or being shown to be in the thick of fighting. That's what the public expects to see of a soldier, but they do not expect to see what the byproducts are. And when you flush those out, I think it has just as much impact, if not more, than actual battle scenes.
There's said to be a bit of black satire or humour around, though, amongst correspondents covering the war. Why did they turn off to the human suffering, pain around them?
I suppose it was the only way they could escape from the problem that was there, and the problem was that this war was probably unwinnable, that the side that they happened to be reporting was the side that was going to lose, and I think that was very obvious in the early 70s.
What part did humour play during the Vietnam War, while you were there?
Well, in my short time, I tried to laugh too, but it was very difficult, and I don't think I've ever been as moved as when I went to the orphanages, for example, and it was really sort of, I'm supposed to be a hard-bitten journalist, but I was really moved by the things that I saw there, and in the hospitals, the drug problem of the American GI, all these byproducts, people who had nowhere to go and had been in a situation of military conflict for 20, 30 years, the destruction that it was doing to them, the destruction of the people. But then there were others who made something out of it, like the Vietnamese taxi drivers in Saigon. They used to queue up each day outside the Caravel Hotel, where the correspondents, the Western correspondents, would stay, and offer to drive you to the war for $50. I mean, you know, you walked out of your hotel and you'd be like getting a cab to the theatre or something like that. There would be a taxi driver saying, "Take you to the war, mister," you know, $50, and you could go to the war for a day. It was always close enough, even in Saigon.
Literally up to the front.
Yeah, yeah. They were obviously very clever. They didn't take you to an extremely dangerous situation, but they were available to take you to where fighting was taking place, where people were firing real bullets and everything was real.
Can you tell me about that experience, though, the people who used to go out on a picnic every day?
Well, these were a couple of correspondents who were hard-bitten American correspondents. They used to do this. They used to go to the war every day and get some copy or some pictures or whatever it was. And they had a little staging post about halfway up Highway 1, and they'd get there about lunchtime and drop off their supplies, the old French influence of having a good bottle of wine with your nice chicken or whatever it might be, and they'd leave it there every day. And they did this for a week or so, and one day they'd been up to the front and come back for their nice lunch with their bottle of wine, and the whole area had been destroyed by an attack by the Viet Cong. So you never knew, although they were at the front, supposedly exposed to danger by going to the front. In fact, their little staging post, which was supposed to be safe, had in fact been blown out from under them.
Can you come to any conclusions about fate, given those sort of stories?
Well, I think, yes, I suppose fate plays a great deal. I mean, it could have been their car, could have been hit as it stopped there. You know, you just can't say. There are very unlucky people who died there.
Journalists pride themselves in their objectivity and not becoming emotional or too involved. Why do you think they don't take a moral stand on something like a war?
Well, I think some do, but you know, I had very strong views about the Vietnam commitment. I regard it as political, and I regard it as a mistake. But there are others in the community who did not share that view. They supported the war and supported the commitment. I don't think it would be fair of me, just because I have the opportunity to appear on television to espouse my particular thoughts about the morality of the Vietnam War. I really don't think that it would be up to me to shove down people's throat my particular personal opinion.
Nevertheless, the owners of the station that you are working for, they've got very definite views about the war and use their control of the media to put that view across to the Australian public.
Well, I don't think my station, my television station, did express any view on the war. I think we gave equal coverage to pro and anti demonstrations, etc. The Combine that owned the television station expressed through its editorials its position on the war.
Were you aware, though, there were things that you just couldn't write because they wouldn't be approved or they wouldn't be used?
No, I don't think there was anything that was specific about what I shouldn't write or what I shouldn't report on, but I was well aware that there were commitments by Australians, and Australians in the field meant that Australian people should give them some support and not appear to be destroying their effort because we think we know better.
So you think that the attitude of your employers didn't limit your coverage of the war or the way you viewed it?
Only in as much as they didn't send anyone there at sufficient time to report the war, to present another viewpoint, a particular viewpoint of an Australian reporter in the field rather than depending on American film.
It's been said that the American networks used Koreans and Vietnamese cameramen as fodder in the end of the war. Do you go along with that?
No, not as fodder, but the American cameramen very quickly realised, after they'd been in the thick of the fighting, that it was a very dangerous occupation and a lot was demanded of them. And
this is at the end of the war?
No, during it. Well, in the late 60s, there were American cameramen assigned, but then they ran out of American cameramen who would be assigned to Vietnam. And then they began using foreign cameramen, if you like, photographic mercenaries who at the right price felt it was worthwhile.
Why did they run out of American cameramen?
Well, the American cameramen refused the tour of duty.
But they were covering it before, of course, the money was good.
Yeah, they did cover it, the money was good, but obviously after one term it was just enough for anyone, and I can appreciate why that was so.
Were you insured when you went into the war zone?
No.
How did you feel about that?
Well, in retrospect, I think I was crazy, but I very soon came to grips with it by not exposing myself to any danger, especially when I found that people in a comparable situation, like American on-camera reporters, were being paid $100,000 a year on a contract basis.
Were you naive in terms of being prepared for a war zone?
Of course, yes.
How?
I didn't ask for any special favours from my television station. I expected that I'd be able to call the shots when I got there and decide what I'd do and what I wouldn't do. I thought that you'd be able to define where the danger was and where it wasn't, and expose yourself to minimum danger, but there was no minimums at all. You couldn't determine what a minimum was.
B. Roll 3, Slate 7. Did the ABC actually give you any directives on how you'd go about reporting the war?
None at all. In fact, the ABC gave little directions about any sort of coverage of events in Southeast Asia. On one occasion, after I'd written a story concerning the water torture case, in which I quoted a reliable source as saying that the woman involved was probably dead after having been handed over to South Vietnamese security forces.
From the Australians?
Yes, in fact it was an Australian Army officer who told me this. I couldn't quote him by name, of course. But I received a rocket from Sydney, from ABC head office, and I recall its terms because of their poetic grandeur, that Pinwell had elevated common gossip to the level of implied fact. They did nothing about that. They were partly worried because someone in the Senate had raised it that same day and said, of course, she was alive and that Australians wouldn't do this sort of thing. The pressures that came were not from the ABC, but most often from government people, and in particular foreign affairs people. There was one little man in particular who regarded the ABC as an extension of the government and as an arm of government policy. And on one occasion, when there was an outbreak of fighting this was in Cambodia, in Phnom Penh, between Cambodian government forces and their allies, the Saigon government troops, which I dutifully reported, he said to me, Bill, it's not in our...
Go on.
He said it's not in our interests.
Go again, you're right.
On one occasion in Phnom Penh, in Cambodia, when there was an outbreak of fighting in the city itself between South Vietnamese government troops and Cambodian government troops, this foreign affairs man said to me, it's not in our interests to report this kind of story. And I said to him, his name is Mac Williams, by the way, he still works for Foreign Affairs. I said to him, what do you mean by our interests? And he said, in the government's interests. And I said, but the ABC is not the government. My job here is to report what happens. And this was a very clear clash between two lots of armed forces.
This happened often or just isolated?
This happened a number of occasions. There was another time when a Foreign Affairs man said you shouldn't be seeing so much of so-and-so because he's in fact an East German spy. He was a journalist, as far as I was concerned, and indeed he was a journalist. I later checked this with the Americans, and they said, no, in fact, this man isn't a spy at all. The trouble with the Australians is that they see spies under every bush. But there was a tendency by a lot of Foreign Affairs people, not the good ones. The good ones realised the ABC was doing a job of reporting in the same way as the London Times, the BBC, the New York Times, or the Christian Science Monitor.
Just while you've got that